And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast, and I think we're going to be continuing our look at climate change data and maybe looking at some more historical stuff this time. Just want to remind everybody before we get into it, randallcarlson.com is the website to go to for anything you want related to Randall. Check there for tours and trips. You can always sign up for the newsletter. You get, Randall, don't you write something for the newsletter each time there's something written?
Yeah, oh yes, I do. I pull together some topical stuff that's going on out there of interest to the kinds of things we like to follow, and usually do a synopsis of 3 or 4 or 5, current papers or articles that are out there in the literature that are interesting. And what we do, we did for the Patreon members, we made, last year we did a bundle of, maybe it was 2022 newsletters that we sent out in PDF form to everyone. We need to do an update on that.
Right, you caught everybody up. If they weren't there from the beginning, you made the whole series of them available, correct?
Yeah, so we've accumulated quite a few since then. I bet you we're up to a year now, so yeah, we should look and get that archived again and get that out to folks that are interested, because there's a lot of the stuff even from a year ago is still ongoing, still very interesting stuff.
Absolutely. And go ahead and make the SGI statement up front here, because
good idea.
A lot of people don't make it to the very end, and that's really got to get cleared off the books there. That's gone on too long.
That has gone on way too long, yeah. So I'm sure some of you know what that's about. For those of you who don't, there's a site out there, Sacred Geometry International, that I tried to partner with a number of years ago, and then that just went south because of a lot of things that are going to soon be disclosed. But in any case, the administrator of the site's been selling my work for at least 4 or 5 years now with no remuneration to me whatsoever, and he lets people believe they're buying my work, which it is my work, but people do believe that they're buying from me, that I'm receiving money for it. I'm not. I haven't received a penny in at least 4.5 years from the sales of my work. And he's been served twice with 2 cease and desist letters. And probably as a result of getting the second one, he left the state and moved to another state. And then shortly after there, relaunched the website on a Malaysian host, where it's much more difficult to get copyrights shut down. So it's right now all use and sales of my work from that website, Sacred Geometry International, is fraudulent and illegal. So we've gotten that out of the way, and let's get back to the good stuff.
So there will be a new Sacred Geometry series of courses.
Oh,
classes, that will be much better versions of what were beta tests there that he's still selling, that weren't even really supposed to be sold, but he's still putting them out there and offering sales 50 off, which means he's not paying Randall the 50 that he's supposed to.
Right. So yeah, it's I think it comes very much under the definition of embezzlement. So he is selling a unfinished beta version of the Sacred Geometry course, which is why that website was launched in the first place, was to try to serve as a venue to put Sacred Geometry courses out. So a long train of things, which I'm sure as legal proceedings go forward here, all of that detail will come out, exactly what went down. People will be able to see for themselves. So anyways, that's, don't buy anything from that site. Don't donate, and if you feel so inclined, let people know. Sacred Geometry International is fraudulently selling Randall Carlson's work.
So the Facebook account, the Twitter account that's purported to be Randall, people think it's him making posts. He has not done any of that any of the years, and that's continued. So
yeah,
we got to get that ended, so we want more people to know.
Yo, what up, Moonraker?
Yeah, another frustrating thing about the Rogan show that didn't come out.
Not today, not right now.
Really try to get it spread widely, and that hasn't come out.
Not today.
We're gonna get there.
What's up, man?
Yeah, we're gonna get there. Okay, So, there we go. You know, there we are. I lost you. So what happens sometimes is I was looking at the file I'm going to pull up. It puts you guys in a thumbnail, but it puts you in this little thumbnail, and I guess what happens is it gets lost up there in you know, I've got this astronomical desktop, and up in the stars in the Milky Way, it's like you guys are this little thumbnail, and I'm like, where did you guys go? And then I look up there and I see that little thumbnail kind of coming through the Milky Way galaxy, you know. Okay, there you are. Okay.
Base is big.
Base is big, yep.
Well, yeah, we can work on some of your settings for that if that's what you're doing with the new. Yeah, Randall's got a new super fast computer that Russ built, and he's working off 3 monitors now after dealing with just 1 for a long time. So, yeah, we need to work on those settings though, because yeah, there's ways to make it so they're not tiny. Still know you're talking to some people.
You get that monitor set up with a flight simulator.
Yep.
There we go.
Have a lot of fun because you can fly around over some of these places you talk about.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, some of the actual places using what software do you use for that?
Well, I know I think Microsoft Flight Simulator is actually really good. A lot of people use it.
Yeah, so I was gonna say just flight simulator. Yeah, Peter Zelenka has told us about that multiple times.
Don't get so distracted by the geology that you crash. You know?
That could happen, I guess.
Yeah. Randall's like, can you turn the plane upside down? I see that better. And then, slam into a mountain.
Well, Brad will testify to this. We've been up in some rather harrowing situations in small, you know, single wing aircraft, and it's like 50-mile-an-hour gusts, and I'm trying to hang out the side and take pictures, and then, oh man, yes, that was actually.
Yo, what's up, Sonny Yellow Jack? How you doing?
Over the Snake River.
See you.
That's right. Yep.
But we did get some good shots. You know, the one that I quite frequently show of the Snake River in the big, scooped out canyon. I've shown it many times.
The classic underfoot river image.
Yeah.
Gregory.
That was taken during that.
Gregory Manarino.
See, so Brad and I are out there risking our lives. I mean, people need to know that. This is not just armchair stuff. This is. So let me see, Bradley. Let me look at there. Let me think.
TGIF, am I right, Greg?
There. That's got to be the Flathead River. That's not the Mission Mountains in the background.
No.
From our
Sounds very nice, man.
The dam open.
Oh, sure.
There you go.
That's the.
No, man.
That's
yeah, man. Enjoy it. When I go to a buffet, I avoid desserts.
Just below the dam.
I don't eat any dessert.
That was pretty awesome.
And
looking west.
Yeah.
West.
Yeah.
Oh, that was
enjoy it, man.
Yeah, that was like day 1. I think that was one of our first stops on the trip.
Yeah, if you want to avoid gaining weight, I would recommend avoiding desserts.
We're in Bonner's Ferry there.
Yeah,
that was on the way over to Polson.
So we're going to do that again, aren't we? A Montana trip?
Absolutely, coming up in
just
September.
Like meat.
And we've talked now about the Bonneville. We haven't organized the Bonneville.
Maybe pizza.
Trip, but
Pizza's a bit.
Would be a good one.
When I eat a pizza, I make sure I do like a workout or something around then.
Yep.
Brad was working
April. In April and early May, yeah, I'm gonna revisit.
Yeah, I eat really well.
Several places that we've been to, 18,
not
20 years ago.
Lean,
Actually,
I'm not very
we went
lean
in
at
2000.
all. But I eat
Right
whatever I
after
like.
we got going on this was our first traverse of the Bonneville flood zone.
I don't need any sugar.
And what I thought, I thought that
sweets,
a really
artificial sugar.
awesome trip would be start.
No
we do the
pastries,
whole
no donuts,
raft
no muffins.
we're in our raft
no cake,
on
no
Lake Bonneville.
soft drinks.
The dam ruptures up
cookies.
at Red Rocks Pass, and all of a sudden the water starts gushing out of there,
I haven't had
300
those in
feet
years,
deep and a half a mile wide. And so the spigot opens up, and we're sitting in our raft,
very long.
and we notice, what's going on? And we see the water level starting to drop. And then we start feeling the current, and then it starts carrying us northward. Now we would be roughly, say we're floating in our raft, roughly where Great Salt Lake is now, the city. the city of Salt Lake, not the.
I was considering not doing that
that's
track because it was full health. It wasn't that
the
fast.
raft would start drifting forward,
Fast
and as it moves north, the farther north it gets, the faster it'll be moving. And pretty soon, we're going to be in this massive white water, 300 feet deep, probably moving at, 50 miles an hour, 40 miles to 50 miles an hour, rushing through Red Rock Pass. We're hanging on for dear life. And then it goes through the pass, and then it makes a sharp turn to the west, literally a 90-degree turn to the west. We're like swept up on the sides of the cliffs, sweeps out, and then it comes out, opens onto Snake River Plain, right there by American Falls Reservoir, where the town of Pocatello now is. And now the
basketball court maybe it's raining here.
As the water's spreading out, it's slowing down, it's getting shallower, and we're thinking we've survived. But just when we think we've survived, all of a sudden, we find ourselves being swept down as it's carving out Snake River Canyon, which is half a mile to a mile wide, up to 500 feet deep, I think. And we're swept along all the way across southern Idaho, turns north, and then we're swept through Hell's Canyon. And at the same time that it sweeps through Hell's Canyon, it's probably deepening it by another at least a few hundred feet, at least, because if it could carve out like there by Perrine Bridge or any of the
thanks,
Greg.
Thanks on Yellow Jacket. Are you serious, man?
Carve out 400 to 500 feet of bedrock, hard basalt bedrock. It's got to have
thank you so much, man. Are you serious?
Which is now
TGIF, Southern Yellow Jacket. That's really nice of you, man.
And then the water rushes through Hell's Canyon, comes out there by Lewiston.
Sorry, man. I'm just
Idaho,
really focused on this game.
Clarkson and Lewiston.
Thanks, man.
Lewiston, and then it flows on in, and then it eases up a bit, and then we're riding along,
man.
and then pretty soon it takes us into the Columbia.
Bro.
So that would be a really cool trip.
Thanks, man.
To start.
How'd your move go?
Great Salt. That's what we did. We started at Great Salt Lake, and then we followed the pathway up through the pass where it burst out. Saw this sedimentary plug, what was left of it, up there in the red rocks, literally red rocks.
Man,
and
thanks,
it
dude.
goes through, and we were able to follow it all the way through, and then you follow the canyon across.
I know you said things are getting tight now.
It's pretty spectacular. A lot of things, interesting things happening there. What we didn't do was we've done this now. We've gone up to the southern entrance to Hell's Canyon, but the road dead ends there. Because there's no roads along Hell's Canyon. You can only get through there by boat.
Really nice,
and we've come from the top end, the north end, down to its outlet. But so now what we would do is for a tour, the climax of the tour would be that boat trip through Hell's Canyon. I mean, I can't think of any other way to finish off that trip.
The buffet, dude.
That would be something.
Hells yeah.
And, Hell's Canyon, deeper than the Grand Canyon.
Hey man, I hope I'm entertaining enough for you.
Recovery site up there also, between the outlet.
I will try to play basketball for you this weekend. I will try my best.
Tammany Bar, I wasn't aware of that, so I saw a sign driving through there last fall. So I need to look that up. But yeah, I don't think it's a mass
money that all gets
grave
sucked up with bills. Oh man, I'm
yard.
sorry, dude.
But there was a.
Yeah, man. You gotta take care of yourself.
But yeah,
gotta take care of yourself first.
Well, yeah, and
places to check out. Yep.
Yeah, one diversion off could be going a little ways up, going south, and checking out the Bruno River and the Bruno sand dunes that we talked about. I think we talked about that in the live stream.
This guy I do not appreciate.
Some of the highest sand dunes in North America. They're like up to 400 feet high. That would be an interesting thing to see in itself. So there's a lot of little side stuff off. Then, of course, there's like Craters of the Moon, which could be a little side trip off of the main following the flood route. You guys know
all those, yeah, man.
Yeah,
we'd want to do all those, absolutely.
Yeah, so that could be a pretty awesome tour.
Yep.
And we could divert. Oh well, we did this before. We could divert by Bear Lake perhaps and make that. Remember, we made that loop around, and we came out on the cliff overlooking Red Rock Pass, and you could get this great view to the west of the whole pass. And yeah.
But we're not taking the mountain road to get down to it. That was gnarly.
Oh, that's right. It was gnarly, wasn't it?
Yeah. But there were some ice caves back there and a boulder field and some interesting stuff. But yeah, it wasn't easy access back into the over to Red Rock Pass. Yeah, we had
Thanks,
one of the
man.
guys that right. Remember he like
That's really
got
cool,
out
dude.
of
I just put on the stream because I want to stream one, play this one, and get
He walked behind us. He did that twice.
fucking get the sum. That's really
Well, that
cool.
was two
Man.
different trips, but he did the same thing twice. Yeah. You know. No, we're not taking 3 vans. We're not taking 3 vans of people down that crazy road. Anyway, yeah, more examples of us getting out there and risking all to study this stuff.
Well, yeah, the other time I remember this fella, good fella, but, you know, that other time that he got out of the van, he went down the road, I guess. Did we give him a walkie-talkie or what? But he got down to the bottom, and then we went ahead and drove on down. We get down there, and I guess he was, thought he'd heard a mountain lion stalking him. So,
Right.
I think that was it. So he got back in. He decided that the lesser of two evils was taking his chance on the narrow road with the cliff over being stalked by a mountain lion. So I was never convinced that there really was a mountain lion.
I think, was that Schnebley Hill Road going down into the
I think
side
that
of
was
Sedona there when it was still passable? You can't take a normal vehicle on that road anymore.
No, you can't.
Jeep tours only. Yeah, it's a crazy bad road. Anyway.
Yeah, well, Kyle, didn't we? Yeah, we were up there. You had your truck, didn't you? At Schnebley Hill, and we were all going to try to go get up Schnebley Hill, and we had to turn back.
We tried to get our rental vehicles up there. That's right.
I had a truck.
Yeah, you did. You had
like
your
a little Dodge SUV or something.
Oh,
No,
Daniel's truck.
Oh, brutal.
No,
Because he came.
no, that was in Idaho. That was a different one. Yeah, you were in like a little Dodge Journey
were
or
you?
something. We were in like a Lincoln
Oh,
Navigator or something.
It was
Oh,
some
brutal.
rental. I don't know what.
Oh,
We rented like the most hardcore SUV that they had, which was like almost a glorified bubble.
Fuck you.
Had like 8 inches of clearance maybe.
Yeah.
And we were like, yeah, we'll take this road. And we went down there for a while and it was like, I don't know about this. And some guys coming the other way were just like, ain't gonna make it through with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
Around.
Right.
SUV shaped bubble. That's right. It was. Yeah, that was.
Damn it! I think I'm still too
Detour
slow.
guys were like, no.
Yeah, he's like,
So-
yeah, we just pulled somebody
did it a
out
couple
that was in a
times, but I'm just too
Pathfinder or a
slow.
Forerunner or something. He's like,
And
you're
it
not
was like
going up
more
there in
awesome than your glorified bubble. There.
so
Right.
this was like there was some kind of like conspiracy going on here, wasn't there? Because didn't these guys somehow persuade to not keep up the road or something because they wanted it all to?
something like that. Yeah.
Oh, so that they could run their tours.
They'd be the only ones that could, get up there.
Nice
They wouldn't have to pay for the tour. yeah.
Okay, you guys don't want to be controversial. Okay, so we won't be. From now on, no more nothing.
Controversial. Let's talk about climate change.
No more. Yeah, no more controversy. We're done with controversy.
Little ice
Fuck
age.
you, asshole.
So we were talking about the other side of the carbon dioxide equation, the one we don't get to hear about. All we hear about is that carbon dioxide is going to cause catastrophic warming, and we're all doomed. We're in the midst of a climate crisis. And we're in the midst of a 6th great mass extinction. It's going to be as great as the Cretaceous Tertiary mass extinction that wiped out 75% of all life on Earth, including all the dinosaurs. And it'll be right up there with the Permian Triassic mass extinction when 90 to 95% of all life, terrestrial and marine, all life was almost decimated, completely 100%. The planet came within a hair's breadth of becoming sterilized. But yeah, we're in a crisis comparable to the Permian Triassic, the late Ordovician, the late Devonian, the Jurassic the Triassic Jurassic, the Cretaceous Tertiary, the Eocene, the Oligocene. Yeah, and now we are in the midst of something that's the equal. Although
Be the Holocene obscene boundary.
and you know what? I think, okay, right now I'm going to make a commitment that we're going to devote one episode at least to looking in detail at the Great Five. How does that sound?
That would be great.
That would be good.
Yeah.
The Great Five. Yeah, these are the ones I just named off. Actually, the Eocene Oligocene isn't one of the Great Five. The Terminal Pleistocene is not one of the Great Five. Because we're talking all species. Now, we're looking at 100 species of mammalian life lost during at the end of the Ice Age. But there was very few smaller species that became extinct, right? Because see, that's what makes this extinction so unique in its way, is that it really went for the top of the food chain. You know, the biggest animals, the ones that dominated, the predators, the omnivores that dominated their particular ecological niche, half of them, actually more than half of them, gone.
I kind of think that makes sense, right? The stronger, the more powerful the extinction event, the farther down the food chain it reaches.
Exactly. That's exactly it, Russ. That's exactly right.
It's fast. No.
So when you got one that reaches all the way down and only leaves the bottom 5% or 10% of the food chain, that's hell on earth. Hell on earth. And, you know, my advice has always been consistent with the folks promoting the 6th Great Mass Extinction event. You know, and I like to use the Cretaceous Tertiary as sort of an analog, because it's pretty much ranked of the Great Five, the KT, which is now called the Cretaceous Paleogene, but that's a mouthful. I like and am used to Cretaceous Tertiary, and I'm going to learn. I learned how to say that properly years ago, and I'm going to keep saying that instead of Cretaceous Paleogene. Okay. Plus, it's a syllable or two less. So anyways, the Cretaceous Tertiary is right in the middle of the five in terms of lethality, the mortality factor. It's after the Permian Triassic and after the terminal Ordovician. And then comes the KT. I'll call it the KT because that's what it's been known as for decades, the KT boundary. But when you look there and you go through the literature, which of course I've done exhaustively, you know, what you find is, good God Almighty, you know, you had biomass burning that consumed up to half the biomass on the planet, which put so much soot and particulate matter alone into the atmosphere that it would have cut off sunlight. But then you add to that the material that was blasted into the atmosphere as the result of the single crater, the Chicxulub crater, which is the big one, you know, off the Yucatan Peninsula that's associated with that impact. However, there's evidence pretty convincing that it wasn't a singular impact event, but a multiple impact event, whereas the one in the Yucatan was probably the biggest and most dramatic. But there's considerable evidence that Indian geologists have found when we get into the mass extinction events, we can look at that.
Wow.
They call it Shiva crater.
How
which
did
is
I,
off of,
like, what?
I think it's in the Bay of Bengal.
Good God Almighty.
I don't remember exactly
really
where it is, but it looks to be on the same size scale as the KT. Anyhow, so now you've got massive global wildfires. You've got months of darkness because with the particulate matter from the impact itself goes into the atmosphere. Now you've got billions of tons of particulate matter injected into the atmosphere. You've got the soot and the smoke, which circles the whole globe, cuts off photosynthesis in the process, and then after the fires have burned themselves out, now you're going to get the cosmic winter that sets in. And you're going to have at least several years of pretty much the whole planet being in an ice age. So, and then on top of that, you're going to have all of the toxins, the dioxins and everything that's pumped into the atmosphere. Which causes acid rain. You're going to have global acid rain. That's another one of the things that's been documented. And we're talking a pH of 1. Literally, a pH, that's the estimate. And when we get into this, I'll pull up all of the references, all the data, and we'll look at it. But you think about global acid rain, pH of 1, cosmic winter, months of darkness, global scale firestorms. And we are supposed to believe that we are now literally in the midst of a mass extinction event that's on the same scale of severity as the Great Five. It just doesn't make any sense at all. And my response to these people that are promoting this is, look, you guys, before you look at any data, before you actually read the science about these grade 5, just go outside for a little while. Go outside, and guess what? If you look up at the sky, it'll be blue. Half the world's biomass is not going up in flames. Come on. Anyhow, so did we leave it? So I'll pick up with this study. I think this is maybe where we left off. Elevated carbon dioxide ameliorates the effects of ozone on photosynthesis and growth. Species respond similarly regardless of photosynthetic pathway or
I really should get a
functional
completion
group
hopefully today.
that appeared in the new Phytology,
If I'm serious,
volume 138,
I gotta
in
get at
the
least
year
completion or
1998.
something.
Did we
I don't
reference
know
that?
how rare it is though.
Yes.
I thought we did. That's kind of where we left off.
Seems pretty rare.
Kind of
I
right
have
in there.
become way too overzealous in my words.
So yeah, so the what they were addressing, I don't know how much detail we went to it. I'll just briefly cover it. That you've got. So what the authors did, they selected 6 perennial species consisting of 2 types of trees, quaking aspens and red oak. Okay, 2 species of grass from the C3 group, western wheatgrass and prairie June grass, and 2 species from the C4 group. While you're there, would you look up C4 photosynthetic pathway? And we'll get a little more clarification. So what they did was they took a variety of different kinds of plants, so C3 plants, basically what it boils down to is they have a different method of extracting carbon from the carbon dioxide molecules. So that's what the C3 and the C4 actually represents, is that the different mechanism involved in extracting the carbon from that carbon dioxide molecule. What did you find, Kyle?
The C4 photosynthetic pathway is a photosynthetic process used by plants to turn light, carbon dioxide, and water into sugars that fuel plant growth. Begins in mesophyll cells and ends in bundle sheath cells. Where PEP carboxylase attaches an incoming carbon dioxide molecule and produces oxalacetate. I don't know, a 4-carbon
cetate, oxalacetate. But yeah, we don't need to get into that. But the key point is that there are 2 different plants have 2 different mechanisms by which they extract that carbon from the carbon dioxide molecule. So that's the key. So you've got the C3 plants, the C4 plants. C3 plants are more adapted to an arid type of environment where there's going to be less available water. The C4 plants encompass most of our food crops. Okay. So anyways, the idea is to get in this study was to get a relatively diverse cross-section of plants. To perform the experiment conducted at the University of Wisconsin, 64 seedlings of each species were planted in 2 controlled environment growth rooms. Each room was divided into 4 individual chambers for the purpose of testing the different treatment regimes. So then now this is quoting from the paper itself. In industrial regions, current ambient levels of O3, which is ozone.
I can't wait to never do that strat again.
Subscript 3. reduce photosynthesis in
I can't wait to never
most
do that
plant
strat again.
species. Chronic ozone pollution commonly results in increased respiration rates, which means more
Unless in
water
like
loss,
RTA or something.
shifts
But not
in
even.
the carbon
Just to
allocation,
never do that strat. It's just
decreased
so terrible.
leaf
It's just so painful.
retention, and shortened leaf longevity. And current levels are known to be high enough to reduce the growth and yield of agricultural crops and trees. So then they report the results of their studies, where they increased the amount of ambient carbon dioxide to see how that interacted with the effects of ozone on all these different kinds of
I
plants.
gotta rush him before I aim.
The first thing that they noticed
So I gotta
was
rush
that
him before I aim. I
quote
always
here
do
from
that.
the paper, in
I gotta
all
rush him.
6 species used in this experiment, plants grown at ambient carbon dioxide were smaller and had a lower relative growth rate when exposed to an elevated level of ozone-induced reductions in the in situ photosynthesis at ambient CO2. End of quote. So in other words, under a concentration of CO2 equal to present atmospheric concentrations, the presence of ozone caused stunted growth in the test plants. But then listen to the quote that goes on here. Examination of the interactive effect of carbon dioxide and ozone reveal that elevated carbon dioxide reduced the deleterious effects of high ozone
bullshit
on both photosynthesis and growth. So in their conclusion, they state that an elevated carbon dioxide environment seems to ameliorate the adverse effects of elevated ozone on both photosynthesis and growth, regardless of photosynthetic pathway or plant functional group. The amelioration of ozone by carbon dioxide concentrations forecasted for the next century may have important consequences for both individual and interactive species responses. So the point being is we can add that function to many other functions of elevated carbon dioxide in promoting the well-being of the plant world, of the biosphere, right? So I think then we got into the idea of looking at the 1980s, early 1984 paper, when they started, did we get into this paper? It came out in 84, Increasing Atmospheric Carbon Dioxide, Tree Ring Evidence for Growth Enhancement in Natural Vegetation. I don't think we did. Sound familiar?
I don't recall about the tree rings getting into that one.
No.
Yeah, I don't think so. So this appeared in the journal Science, 1984, Increasing Atmospheric Carbon Dioxide, Tree Ring Evidence for Growth Enhancement.
Oh, this is so fast.
So there was two types of trees in this study. Bristlecone pines that grew near the tree line at altitudes typically or around 10 to 11,000 feet above sea level. Earlier studies by the author of this paper discovered that tree ring thickness and hence tree growth rates began accelerating after about 1840, coincident with the transition out of the Little Ice Age. It was assumed that this was due exclusively to the warming climate. However, later studies up to the 1980s showed continued accelerated growth rates in spite of the fact the climate began to cool during this period and continued to do so through the 60s and 70s.
I can just take one gun.
That's something we are going to kind of come back to when we look at a more in detail graph of adjusted climate temperature increases over the 20th century. What you actually will see, and I think we've looked at this before, is that you actually see that the 30s, the 20s and the 30s was a big peak of warming, with the 30s being the warmest decade out of the whole 20th century. Then it kind of leveled off, except then between the late 40s and the 70s, the climate actually cooled. There was a cooling period, interestingly, that coincided precisely with the post-World War II jump in fossil fuel consumption, right? And this is partly what was responsible for the fear in the 70s for an oncoming ice age. Remember that? Now, a lot of the...
I remember reading articles about that in the 70s.
Yeah.
Clipping those out. Global warming imminent, or global cooling imminent.
Yes, global cooling was imminent. But here's the kind of an ironic thing in my mind. I kind of think that there was a legitimate basis to that, to thinking that. I mean, it was wrong, but here's the two factors. One is that, yes, when those articles came out in the 70s, there had been at least 25 years of cooling climate. The other thing is, you know, coming up from the 1950s, once with radiocarbon dating started becoming a tool that could be used to date these events, it had become apparent by that time that the Ice Age was a much more recent event and much faster.
I forgot how many bullets I shot.
So it became apparent that rather than one long, protracted period of ice in massing, you had multiple episodes where the ice would grow for a period of 10 or 15 or 20,000 years, then it would contract. The contraction was called an interstadial. The growth was called a stadial. If it grew to the extent that it was at the late glacial maximum, say 20,000 years ago, that was a glacial, a full glacial. If it melted away to the point where it was equivalent to what we've got today, here's your two prototypes, end to end of this continuum. Late glacial maximum 20,000 years ago, full glacial. Currently, the amount of glacial ice in the world, interglacial, right? An interglacial is not defined as being, I suppose it could be, but getting rid of all of the ice in the world, which now there is evidence that suggests there were times when the total ice volume on planet Earth was considerably diminished from what it is right now. But in any ways, for purposes of definition, we've got an interglacial now, full glacial 20,000 years ago, with more than double the amount of glacial ice in the world. Then within that, you have a stadial, which is a cooling and an increase of the ice, and an interstadial, which is a shrinking back of the ice.
What?
During an interstadial, there's more ice than there is in an interglacial. In a stadial, there's less ice than in a full glacial period. Does that make sense? So you've got, if we look at the brackets, glacial, interglacial, and then you'd have stadial, interstadial. So during an interstade, the ice is going to diminish, but it's not going to diminish to the extent that it is now. Okay, we've talked about this, but just to reiterate that. Okay, so going back to the 20th century, you have these two things, these two factors. The fact that there had been a quarter century of cooling, and now the realization that the frequency of glacial, interglacial pulses was a lot greater than anybody had imagined. So there was kind of almost a legitimate basis for the fears of global cooling. Of course, then what happened is the 80s came along. What happened to the 80s? The temperature started going up again, right? So then in 1988, that's the year James Hansen went before Congress. I think it was a hot day in July, maybe, when he went before Congress. Some of his cohorts snuck into there the night before and turned off the air conditioner. I don't remember the details of that, but yeah, that actually happened. They deliberately turned off the air conditioner in the Senate hearing room where they were meeting, and so they're all in there sweating copiously during this really hot day while James Hansen is delivering this scenario that we're all doomed from global warming. And a lot of things were said in the next few years, as a result of that particular meeting. That summer of 1988, the IPC was launched, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and that's when this whole thing began to steamroll, post-1988. And of course, what was used to legitimize it was the fact that from the 80s and then on into the 90s, the climate was warming. It was going through a warm phase. However, the increase in warming between the 70s, let's say, and the late 80s was not as great as the warming, say, in the early 20th century when we came out of the Little Ice Age and went into the 1930s, the period of these extended droughts, the Dust Bowl, the migrant workers having to leave because their topsoil all blew away, which partly was the result of the fact that I believe it was the Farm Bureau came in, the agricultural department came in,
overgrazing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, they came in and it was, who was it? I forget might have been John Deere. Whoever it was working with politicians to get farmers to buy, tractors, farm tractors and plowing equipment and so on. So the agricultural department goes in and facilitates. It was sort of like you had the agricultural department, you had the banks, and you had I believe it was one of the big tractor manufacturers went in there and convinced these farmers to mortgage their farms and buy these tractors. So that's what lots of them did in that Oklahoma, Kansas area, the middle America right there, the Midwest. And it had come right at the end of a rainy spell. The first, late 19th century, early 20th century, there was copious rainfall in that belt there. Well, it dried up. We went into the drought, and that drought lasted for nearly 10 years. So what happened was they go in there, get the tractors, plow up the soil, then the drought comes, the soil dries out, the wind comes, blows the soil away, and that was pretty much the nuts and bolts of what happened there, and why you had the Okies and the whole, what was it, John Steinbeck's novel, The Grapes of Wrath, based upon that whole period of 1930s history. Interestingly, while nature was kind of going through this depression, this decline, so did we economically. And I think that there's some very interesting correlations looking at what happened to the economic world during the 30s and what happened to the natural world. I think there were connections there, but that's would take us far off where we're going today. So anyways, here's what I'm kind of my wrap up is that we've seen actually oscillations of climate within the last century and a half. We've seen that during this period from the 16 to 17 into the 1800s, glaciers worldwide became the largest they had been since the end of the Great Ice Age. And how do we know that? Well, because the terminal moraines left behind by the Little Ice Age glaciers. That's primarily how we know. And we can also see, when you have a glacier filling a mountain valley and it starts to melt, you get a lot of water, meltwater, flowing along in that interface, in that kind of channel between the glacier ice and the hillside or the cliffside of the mountain. Can you picture that? So when you're melting off, you're getting a lot of water through there, right? That water will erode and it'll etch a line into the hillsides or the mountainsides that you can then use as a proxy to go, okay, well, the glaciers were this thick. They were up to here because the water was here. Once the glaciers began to melt away and they're only half as thick, now those little shorelines or strand lines that are being cut by that water are going to be much lower. And so you can actually see that those meltwater streams along the margins of the glacier will put lines in the hillside, so you can now know, okay, the glacier was up to this level. That makes sense, right?
What?
Yeah, and so it's there once you recognize what it is, and that's how. So you've got, how thick the glaciers were, where they terminated, because the Little Ice Age terminal moraines were built, and since those Little Ice Age glaciers have receded back, those moraines are the biggest moraines that have been formed since the great moraines that were produced, at the end of the Great Ice Age 10 to 12,000 years ago. And so,
what would be the terms that you would use to describe that?
As he rolled, I shot his stupid thigh. So dumb.
Glacial, so would that be what?
Well, you mean during the Little Ice Age?
Yeah.
Maybe that's my fault.
I mean, it was going towards a glacial. But what stopped the process? I don't know. That's the interesting thing, and it's an unresolved question. How do you start a great ice age? Does it start with something like a little ice age, and then some threshold is breached, and
pun intended.
And what?
Nothing. Sorry.
What was the pun? That was a bad pun.
Snowballs.
Snowballs. Yeah, it's snowballs. Exactly. Well, an appropriate pun. The answer is I don't know. I don't know. And I don't know if anybody, there's ideas out there, but that's one of the conundrums. I think that's something, it's a very significant scientific question to know, because that's the thing I've been saying all along. Well, how can we say, there's a consensus and, it's all figured out, but we can't explain the beginning or the end of an ice age. You can go ahead and attempt to use the Milankovitch forces, but those are so slow acting, and we don't see that. We see catastrophic shifts in climate change, in ice volume, in temperature. These things are happening very quickly, very severely.
But could it be something like Milankovitch cycles, and yet there are thresholds in the climate, so that there's this long, slow shift, but then a threshold is reached, and so the change happens quickly?
Well, that would probably be the argument, but I've never seen anything that would really quantify that to a credible extent. I mean,
It's the,
yeah. I mean, you got to say, what the nature of, you got to tell me what, there's a reason for the, see, I think there's thresholds, yes, but I think the threshold is like, for example, you got a huge volcanic eruption, or you have an asteroid impact.
Yeah.
Something like that can push the typical balance over a threshold.
Yeah.
But I think it takes an outside force or an inside. Well, outside meaning perhaps exogenic, could be asteroid, maybe the sun. See, there's that possibility. And this is another conversation we need to have. Is there's some really interesting data that's come out about the sun in the last decade or two that we haven't really looked at yet. So we
need to go there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it could be something like the Milankovitch cycles if it's in the right place. If that long 40,000 year cycle is in the right place, then something like a massive volcanic eruption causes an enormous ice age. Or if the Milankovitch cycle is in a different place, it causes a short one.
Well, and see, the paradox of the onset of an ice age that we've talked about is that you have to precipitate a whole lot of snow over a very large area, and then that snow can't melt.
Yeah.
Because that's what it does now. You know, you figure how many square miles is Canada, and so you figure all of Canada and maybe 10% of northern United States was covered by ice. So how many square miles is that? That's a lot of, maybe 5-6 million square miles, something in that range. So the problem is now you've got to precipitate a whole bunch of snow. It can't melt away, but in order to affect that precipitation, you have to get the water vapor into the atmosphere, but that requires heat.
Right.
So you've got a whole lot of water vapor in the atmosphere precipitating out rapidly as snow. And it does this enough because what will happen is once you cover 5 million square miles with fresh snow, it completely changes the albedo of a whole hemisphere. And that could then cause further cooling, because now, if you've got plants and all of that stuff growing there, it's reflecting a lot of, it's absorbing a lot of radiation, whereas now if it's all white, fresh snow, it's reflecting. So that's heat being reflected back to space. So that could be a factor. It probably is a factor. How much of a factor? I don't know. But it does change the albedo. But you can see the problem there is in order to get that volume of water into the atmosphere, you have to have heat, thermal energy. But then it has to be cold enough in the higher latitudes that snow falls and doesn't melt. You can't have summer. I mean, you can't. Summer has to be gone.
It's so dumb, the grenade lag.
Or you're not going to get a buildup of, thousands of feet of snow that ultimately compresses into glacial ice. So there's the problem. And that's why I think that we have to begin thinking outside the box, which is that let's think, okay, how could we simultaneously, is there a way we could simultaneously inject huge amounts of water vapor into the atmosphere? And then that could be followed perhaps by some cessation, something that then blocks the sunlight. Maybe an impact into an ocean or an ice sheet would do exactly that. This kind of thing needs to be tested, and I don't know to the extent that it really has applied the question of, say, an impact into an ocean or an ice. Well, let's say if you have a multiple impact event, some of the impact
glaciers. Let's see.
Wait, say that again, Kyle.
Nuke the glaciers, and we'll find out, and we'll see what it does.
Well, you see that you brought that up. That's really kind of almost what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean that's what an impact would do, basically.
Yeah, it is.
Magnitude.
Although, I don't know if that would be such a good way to test the hypothesis, Kyle.
A great way to test it.
It's the only way to test it.
It'd be dangerous.
Like you're saying, there's so much snow would build up, right? And then there's tectonic stresses, etc. And you have an earthquake and a volcanic eruption or a series of eruptions, the whole Cascade Range, some places like that, the Pacific Ring, and then, you can fill the atmosphere with dust.
So an impact into an ice sheet or ocean would initially put a whole bunch of water vapor into the atmosphere. Then the question would be how long, given given a certain velocity, a certain mass, certain energy release, how much equivalent water would be converted to vapor, how, the physics of it, we're just going to require some computer modeling to determine that. But, then if the atmosphere if turbulence is induced in the atmosphere, it might more effectively distribute that water vapor. But I think that it's clear that we see evidence of intense pluvial events all over, in not necessarily in glaciated terrain. I mean, the whole southeast and southwest has the imprints of these extreme pluvial events, extreme rainfalls, way beyond anything in modern time. And that was the interesting thing about this 1969 James River event, when Hurricane Camille, which had come up from the Gulf and it stalled over Virginia, over the headwaters of the James River, and it dumped over a period of 2 or 3 days. It dumped so much water onto these, the particularly one county up there that just got inundated. And what it did was, and Brad and I have actually gone up there and looked at some of this material, and you can still see scars on the hillsides up there on the Appalachian Mountains. You still see the scars from this event. And so what it did was it triggered a whole bunch of mass wasting and reshuffling in boulder deposits. It created boulder deposits. The interesting thing is, and I've got a paper written on this study talking about the largest size of the boulders moved during this James River event, or this Hurricane Camille event, when there was so much water, so much rainfall dumped, that literally birds, I think it was like up to 30 inches in a 24-hour period. But there were like birds that were sitting on tree branches, and after it was all over, they found the birds dead under the trees because they had literally drowned. There was so much rain coming down, and people, say you couldn't see, feet in front of your face because the rain was so intense. And so here's the thing. There are ancient boulder deposits all throughout the southern Appalachians. Those boulder deposits, when you look at the boulders that were moved by Hurricane Camille, drenching, torrential rainfall, the biggest ones are approaching some of the smaller boulders in these ancient boulder deposits. And I mean, we're talking about boulders that weigh thousands of tons that are, mantling the hollows and the stream channels and stuff all over the southern Appalachians. And the modern creeks would be completely incompetent to move those boulders, right? Maybe even after the break, we'll actually, I'll show you a few pictures of these, and you get the idea immediately. So here's what I'm getting at, is that there's a whole lot of proxy type of evidence that tells us very clearly that in the past there have been these rainfall events that have probably been 10 to 100 times greater than anything we've seen in modern times, or have been measured, since we've had meteorological data coming in and since we've been collecting this data. Well, how would you explain something more intense than what happened with Hurricane Camille over the James River? See, that's where it gets really interesting. So it pretty much clearly we can acknowledge, there have been these tremendous rainfall that have completely just inundated the landscape.
Where? What? Like, come on.
What do we call them again, Brad? The slumps that we see out in the western cliff faces. We've several prominent ones on Hopi lands that we've seen
in Arizona.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's up with the media. I know we've got hung up on that.
We get hung up on that every time, but
yeah.
So and then we can go to the southwest in those deserts out there, and what you're looking for, we can see very similar type of evidence. We can see slumps where cliff faces have slid down because they're so completely oversaturated that they lose all cohesiveness. And there's a certain type of geometry that what'll happen when the cliff, we may have seen on our trips, I think we've seen some of those. Yeah.
I think we talked about this
we did
early days on the podcast too.
We sure did. We did.
It slides down and actually folds back towards the hills. So
yes, like it slides out like that. like that.
So there's a slope going towards the new cliff face.
Yes.
Slid down. Yeah.
Yep, and that's the effects of when that ground becomes oversaturated. But you can see that those things have happened, and then they haven't been modified.
Yeah, I didn't throw a grenade far enough.
Whatever that rainfall was, whenever it was, it did this incredible geomorphic work, and then since then, see, and that's the thing about these catastrophic events. They're few and far between, but when they happen, they will rearrange the geomorphology more intensely than, say, 5,000 or 10,000 years or more, 20,000 years of normal incremental change. And that's what we see there out west. We can see the same thing in southwestern deserts. We can see the southern Appalachians. In fact, we could say this all over the non-glaciated part of North America that is now America. Pretty much everywhere you look, if you know what to look for, you can find evidence of these ancient mega events. So, brings us back to the question: how do you start an ice age? Well, I would say that maybe a fruitful way to explore that question would be to consider the effects of a multi-impact event, where initially you have large volumes of water vapor injected into the atmosphere, and then this is followed perhaps by injection of particulate matter, firestorms that are then putting stuff into the atmosphere, volcanic events like Brad just was mentioning, all of these things now combining to create this shield that's reflecting sunlight. And so now we go into a kind of a cosmic winter. So an impact event, and then that's followed by a cosmic winter. The impact, if it's an impact obviously into the landmass, you're not going to have that huge injection of water vapor. But in the studies that I've read through on oceanic impacts, that is one of the consequences, is injection of mega
Yo, what up, bros? Yeah,
water
buddy.
vapor into the atmosphere.
I am doing the new strat.
The rain out that has to follow as a consequence.
I'm trying at least.
But I haven't seen studies that have equivalently, maybe there might be some
We've
out there, I
gotten
would
the
think that I've
guard
heard of them.
once on Double O.
George Howard by now.
We haven't had
But
any glass
looking
openings
at
yet on Double O.
Something equivalent to what happens if you have an impact or even a multi-impact event into an ice
New
sheet.
strat,
And
my
that's what
man.
we
What's up,
need
bro?
to look
Doing,
at,
man?
That's what we need to be modeling.
Absolutely. Well, you ready to take a break?
Yeah, buddy. Good luck to you all. Thanks,
Sure,
man.
let's do that.
Thanks, man.
Well, I was able to
Yeah,
look that
it's
up
a
quickly.
lot
They're
less
called,
heartbreaking.
Torreva.
It might be more
Torreva.
heartbreaking, but
Slump
it's a
blocks.
lot less.
Torreva slump blocks.
It's a lot less intense.
Torreva, I think, is the nearby
Say that.
town there.
Yeah.
This like saves the level,
Torreva.
makes it fun
What were you
again.
thinking?
Flank
Kind of.
failure, or is that just coastal?
Well, no, flank failure, it would be a type of flank
Yeah,
failure,
nice, man.
absolutely.
Wasting, flank failure, yeah.
Yeah,
Torreva
flank failure,
slump
yeah.
blocks. Sure.
In our Atlanta stuff, we looked at flank failures along the Canary Islands and along the coastline of Africa and so forth. But yeah, those would be different, but they're all, in a sense, related. Just different types of
Slides.
Is it the kind of thing you
Slides.
see in these videos from the West Coast where you had a lot of mudslides?
Oops, sorry.
Cliff
I moved my mic, so
and
now
they
it's
form
on my
slide
left.
down and then form a hump at the end of the slide. Is that what you're talking about?
similar.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
similar.
not mud, though. Yeah, they're actually rocks.
Yeah, I mean, as fast
rock
as
layers
possible, I
would drop
think.
down.
Yeah.
It's different than just the soil would create.
I would say as fast as possible.
All right, well, let's go ahead and
That's
take
my
a break.
goal.
Let's do.
And
Break
we'll,
it.
we'll be right back.
We're an hour in. All right.
Like, if this strat works, it would be very, very fast. It would be a very fast run. So let's
Welcome
see.
back to Cosmographia, ladies and gentlemen. Want to mention, before we get back to the main topic, the Earth Origins Conference that's coming up. And I think Randall and Brad have the details.
Yeah, the Earth Origins Conference is going to be April 21st through 23rd. It's going
Oh
to be
my
near
God.
Sedona, in a really nice place in the valley there, north of Phoenix, south of Sedona. Yeah, it's going to be a pretty intense event. I mean, there's going to be a great lineup of people there. You know, Scott, my good friend Scott Wolter is going to be there. You know, he did the America Unearthed series with, was it History Channel? Was it History Channel?
No, he's so dumb.
He's been doing great research on ancient America, looking at the Templar connections. He was deciphered the Kensington runestone in Minnesota, which has been controversial for many years. William Henry is going to be there. He's an investigative mythologist. He's an art historian.
Yeah, man.
And he does really interesting work. He's going to be presenting there. He's, let's see, something like 18 books maybe he's written. Let's see who else is going to be there. Brian Forrester, who's traveled the world researching ancient megalithic works, going to be there presenting on his work. Elias Arjan, I think I'm pronouncing his last name. I had a conference with him. I had a conversation with him, but I don't remember his last name. Sorry, Elias. But anyways, he is working in the field of human lifespan extension and longevity. And so he's been immersed in the strategies and technologies and things that could potentially help some of those of us who are doing this kind of important work to live quite a bit longer, which sounds really good to me. Martin Gray, also a world traveler who has done some amazing photography work, researching ancient sacred sites, and has some incredible books out there. He calls himself an Earth Pilgrim, and I think that's a good title for him. He's going to be there presenting, and he's really done some amazing documentation. Probably nobody's documentation of ancient sacred sites even comes close to what Martin has done. Other names, Carl Tolleman's going to be there presenting. Dan Rogers, Dan Rogers and I are going to be actually doing a little conversation that we're going to record. By the time you're seeing this, that conversation from us will have already come out.
Come
so
on, man.
Dan is doing really great work in looking at natural law, and very much he's into the
like
whole
John Locke type stuff.
Yeah. So he was for decades. He was with the in the aerospace and defense industry.
Am I also going for bulk crouch? Whatever happens.
But now he's on this mission, as he says,
probably not,
to responsibly hitch mankind's minds and machinery to nature's wheelwork.
It's going to be dependent on how much health I would have at the time.
He's a speaker and a storyteller
of everything.
He's going to be there sharing some of his traditions.
So I have it's all going to be
it's going to be a great weekend. And it's actually going to be very complementary to the Cosmic Summit that's coming up in June. If there's a kind of an overriding theme of the conference this weekend, it's going to be my presentation, and I know that Dan Rogers and Scott Wolter and myself have already kind of mapped out a strategy to bring in the thematic image of the Holy Grail and its connection with this particular time of year coming up, and get into some of the background of that. And we will introduce some of the ideas that we're going to be getting into is the possibility and the exploration of the idea of ancient technologies. That won't be the full focus of it, but we're going to be laying the groundwork for further disclosures and revelations about the potential of bringing some of those resuscitating some of those ancient technologies. And some of the stuff that we were talking about over the break, I can't wait to share that with the Cosmographian listeners. What you were showing us, Kyle, is amazing to me, and it fits dovetails right into that, the idea of ancient technologies that we may have forgotten or have been lost. An idea that seems to be very much anathema to the archaeological establishment for some reason. But whatever that reason is, it's like, I think the old guard that is refusing to consider that there's a deeper, more complex history of civilization on this planet are going to soon be just basically left in the dust. So if you get a chance, if you can, there are still seats available for this in person. If you can't get there, then it's going to be, the whole weekend's going to be live streamed via how to. so people will be able to download it through how to and participate that way. So it's going to be, I think, a lot of fun, and the presentations and the material and the information that's going to be shared is going to be amazing. So I would encourage people, do it, and it'd be a great way to, to help connect with
I would
this
recommend getting
community of
ad
people that is
blockers.
emerging worldwide, that is looking
get ad
at
blockers.
things from the perspective
Thanks,
of a much bigger and deeper and more complex picture.
Being here, but I would get an ad blocker.
Discovering that what the potential of our own civilization is going to be in the next few decades, what the potential might be for we as individuals in the next few decades.
Depends how much health I have.
What it might mean for life on Earth in general.
It's going to be a final decision.
This, to me, is the
fundamental
sequence of the Grail itself. Again, the idea that we've talked about so much, the healing, the restoration of the wasteland, the restoration of the royal blood, all of these things are tied together.
I mean,
and
depends how much health I have, but
right
probably not.
Of potentially mind-boggling changes as far as where we can go in the next generation. Right? If we wake up and realize that there's a more to this story and that the tools are right in front of us to do this. So this April thing is going to be, the April conference is going to be very much about segueing into that. And of course, because it's going to be live streamed, we're going to be live streaming it out to the whole planet. And then the follow-up to that is going to be the Cosmic Summit in June. And I think the two are going to complement each other very powerfully. So some of the stuff that's being presented in the April conference will segue right into what's going to be presented in the Cosmic Summit in June in Asheville. This is really beginning to become a compelling idea. People are waking up to this. And I made the comment earlier many times about, how 10 years ago,
it's painful,
15 years ago, who knew the term younger dryas? Basically nobody, right? Outside of a small cadre of professional paleoclimatologists, who knew the younger dryas? Well, I'll raise my hand. I did. Brad did, because we were talking about the younger dryas in the late 1990s, actually. But nobody else to our knowledge was, other than a few, geologists and glaciologists and paleoclimatologists. But now, I think millions of people out there, thanks to what we've been doing, thanks to people like what Graham's doing, thanks to George Howard and a few others, millions of people now know at least something about the younger dryas. So, let me do a little screen share here.
My first two words were younger dryas. I've been talking about it for a long time.
Yeah, I know. My first words, as I recall, at least from what my mother told me, was I was like probably 6 months old. No, maybe a little older, maybe 9 months old.
Oh, well.
Paleo current indicator. Paleo current indicator.
Now, you told us something different before. I was waiting if you were going to say the same thing. You said glaciofluvial. What's your first word?
That was my third word.
That was my third word. My second word was streamlined erosional residuals.
Yeah, well, mine was crypto explosion structure. That was the first thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I didn't get to that. It was like 5 or 6 for me.
Mike's first word was
yeah.
Silence.
Mike's was, he comes out, first word he gets out, and he's in this new world. He's just been born, and he goes, normality. It's normal. Because it was abnormal prior to that. He was okay, this is degenerating fast.
All right, where are we going? Give me the main topic.
How about imbrication? It's one of my favorite topics, because you know what? Speaking of paleo current indicators, imbrication.
Challenge Randall Carlson, younger dryas. Yeah, really.
If I can pull this
That's
off.
funny.
Okay, 2. Here we go. Which I can do this.
That's
I'm
funny.
getting good at this. Alrighty. Do we see a young man with a big floppy hat standing?
Yep.
Okay, we see some rocks stacked up there. Now this is up near, this is in Tennessee or North Carolina. It's right up there near the Tennessee-North Carolina border in, I think
Okay, little
this
current
one,
indicator,
we're
that's
pretty
funny.
sure we're in the, yes, we're in the Great Smokies National Park. Now what you see here is imbrication. Imbrication is the way rocks get stacked up by water. And we've talked about this before, that they're a paleocurrent indicator because the way they're stacked, you know, is showing which direction the water is flowing. And we all here now know that this, we look at this and we know that the water was flowing from left to right, right? And it just, the analogy that I use just is imagine a bookshelf. And you've got the books upright and you push the books and they slide over so that they're tilted, and the way they're stacked up is imbrication, almost like a deck of cards. So when you see rocks stacked up like this, you're gonna know, okay, these rocks didn't just end up here randomly because of gravity. They were laying somewhere and they were picked up in a current and they were stacked, and when the current flowed away, this was what was left behind. So obviously at some point, and I don't know when it was, this piece of land right here was submerged under pretty vigorously flowing water, because in order to move this rock here, I mean, that's probably 500 or 600 pounds anyway,
Cool, man.
right there,
Cool.
that rock. And then we won't even talk about what this is laying back here. But there's a big rounded boulder back there that I think goes back much further than this. And when we go to the next slide, you'll notice the imbrication. You've got 3 boulders here, but these boulders are like 5,000 tons each. But you see these, you can see the 3 of them and how they're stacked up.
Yep.
Current was exactly the same way as the modern creek that's right there. But you can see the creek in the background flowing from right to left. This creek did not emplace these boulders. These boulders are mute, incontrovertible evidence that there has been gigantic floods, at least submerging and inundating this particular piece of landscape here. However, this is just one section. If I go through, okay, this is Boone Fork Creek, and you can see the modern stream right here, and you can see the boulders that line this creek for miles. And so these boulders were not deposited by this water flow, clearly. So the question becomes when and how many events are we seeing represented here? Go to this, look at, you see this rounded boulder? This boulder is nearly 8 feet in diameter. Right now it's sitting out, there's another one right back here. So this water here is not moving these boulders. Now, let's take the largest modern floods that have come through this stream valley here.
Funny. Good one.
Could they pick up and transport these boulders? Probably not. What could they do? Perhaps they could move the boulders a few feet. That might be a reasonable thing to imagine. But they're not going to pick up and entrain a boulder this size that we know of. Now, when I was talking earlier about the Hurricane Camille event up in Virginia over the James River, the largest size boulders were just getting up to maybe this size here. They were like 5 to 6 feet in diameter. But this is actually bigger. This is probably closer to 7 or 8 feet in diameter. If there was a person standing here, they wouldn't be as tall as this.
I did laugh, man. I did.
So we can keep going on here. Again, more creek valleys. Look at
I laughed.
Look at the rubble and the rock
It's funny.
piles that are lining these creek valleys. So this is a mass wasting event. This rock undoubtedly slid from upslope somewhere, came to rest right here. The highway, when they cut the highway, they said, well, I think we'll go around that rock. We won't try to move it. But yeah, I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of valleys from North Georgia all the way up through Virginia up into Pennsylvania. You see the same kind of evidence of these massive boulder deposits where the modern creeks and streams
Man, this route is
would
just
have had
too
nothing
painful.
to do with their
It's
emplacement.
too much.
And then when you couple that with potholes that are not really being created now, but are the remnants. In fact, look here. You can see the remnant of a pothole. Look at the arc here, has a matching arc over here, and if you draw those arcs, you will get a circle that originally was eroded as a huge pothole. And then, but subsequent flows then breached the rock. And you can see, look at the rocks that are stacked up here. The whole point here I'm trying to make is that the emplacement of these big boulders and the incising of the potholes is got to be the same event or similar events, because what this is showing is that you've had these gigantic flows through these creek valleys. Look at here, you see this? This is a pothole, so this is colking. So what you have to visualize here is that you've got, this thing is somewhere close to 5 feet in diameter. So you've got a vortex that's probably 30, 40, 50 feet tall in that depth of water, and it's moving really fast, and that flow is happening long enough so that this hole can be drilled into rock. Then the erosion of the force of the flowing water breaches. You can see here this whole section, about half of the original circle is gone, which would have been, you know, first the pothole.
I think Toronto Leafs are going to win the Stanley Cup every season.
Remember, Kyle, when we were in in the Scablands and we were up there by Deep Lake, and you went in there and there was the big pothole and there was the cave in the bottom?
Yep.
That's how it starts, right there.
That cave is like the beginning of it breaching the side.
Yes. And think about this. If that cave keeps enlarging, but it doesn't completely breach the wall, you're going to have a rock arch. You're going to have a natural bridge. Can you visualize that? Yeah. An imbricate rock.
It doesn't look very heavy if he's...
Well, I mean, this kid had been working out. So, I mean, even then he was only able to hold it up long enough for us to get the shot. And then he had to leap out of the way and the rock collapsed. No, not really. No, this rock is just stacked up, and it's a great example of, okay, the modern stream did not put this rock here. You know, so then I would ask any gradualist uniformitarianist to explain to me explain to me exactly how that rock got there. Well, I can do it if you allow me to invoke, 50 million cubic feet of water per second rushing through this stream hollow here. But let me hear what your explanation is. Now, if you reject my explanation, it's because you're rejecting that possibility that 20 or 30 or 40 million cubic feet per second might have been rushing through this stream valley. But if you accept that as a possibility, well, now we've got a natural explanation for this kind of thing. Look at this. Now, this is up on the Tuckasegee River in North Carolina, but you can see the kind of pothole erosion all over the place, which if we were to come back in a time machine, there was a point where there was such huge volumes of water rushing through this channel that for sustained periods of time,
no point leaving town. Oh, dang.
It would have to be,
sorry, man.
Again,
I'm really
going
sorry
maybe
to hear
using
that,
the Scablands, if we think of Grand Coulee as being cut in 2 to 3 weeks, we could picture here that this might be something that would occur in 3 days to a week. And then once those floods have drained off, it leaves behind this evidence of its passage. But in 10,000 or 15,000 or 5,000, however many thousands of years it's been, very little erosion has occurred on these features. But yeah, I mean, this is clearly evidence of extremely turbulent fast flows. And even if you had a modern flood that lasted for a few, let's say the modern creek,
I hear you. I understand
now. Upriver from this, there was a dam, and sometimes they'll let water
bad to
out
hear,
of the
man.
reservoir.
Sorry to hear that, Moonraker.
But it's really only for a few hours. And when you come back after, you can't notice any difference in these pothole erosional features here. So it has to be really fast, really deep, and it has to be sustained for a long enough time that it can do this geomorphic drilling work, dislodge these great boulders, and it would make sense that the kinds of forces, shear forces within that flowing water that can cut these potholes is also fully capable of, quarrying gigantic rocks and washing them downstream. So let's see, look, you can see the little human figure up here. And again, you look at these boulder deposits, and there's, hundreds of boulders in here, thousands of them that are 4, 5, 6, up to 10 feet in diameter, even bigger. And look up here, you can see that the modern forest growth is encroaching upon the boulder deposits. What you see here in the creek is only part of it. The boulder deposits actually extend onto both sides up into the forest and are gradually and slowly going to get covered up. As the forests go through their cycles, the trees die, soil will build up, and eventually, a few thousand, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years from now, these deposits are going to basically be underground. And you're not going to know that they're there unless you have subsurface, some kind of subsurface investigation, either ground penetrating radar, or you try to drill, or you excavate, or whatever. And you're going to think, well, this is limited to this, what you see right here, but you can see clearly it's not. It extends for a considerable distance on either side of the modern creek channel. Now, what are the chances that a single flood coming through here, even in modern times, that could submerge these rocks actually would have been responsible for depositing these rocks up here? No, I think what we're seeing here is we're seeing the aftermath of really big water flows through here. And this will be, this is one we're going to be visiting this on our tour.
Yep.
And I'm sorry to say we're sold out on that. The tour that we're starting next week. There'll be more. So, for this one, it's going to be fun. Sorry, you guys, Russ and Kyle, I know you guys are what you're doing in Turkey. It's extremely important, but we'll miss you. It won't be the same without you guys there.
No, thanks, man. Yeah, I wish we could go.
Yeah, I mean, it just, I'm already going, you guys aren't going to be around to
go to Turkey, man.
Yeah.
Right.
Then after that, we can go to the Canaries. And then to Gyges.
Well, I'm thinking, we're definitely going to be having a conversation about the Atlantis tour to the Azores.
Publicly, here we go.
Well, I mentioned it, but all right, look at this. Now, what kind of forces? I mean, look, you can see these rocks are obviously been eroded. That's Jesse, yeah.
Jesse's wearing the right kind of shirt.
You got it. And Brad, Jesse and Brad. But look at these boulders here. For God's sakes, I mean, look at these. So ask yourself, what in the world scale of water flow is carrying this kind of stuff as sediment?
And they're not blocky, sharp edges. They've been rolling around, moving and breaking off, so they're quite smooth, even those huge ones. Yeah. So we'll see some of this on our Upper Cumberland tour.
Yeah, this is one of the places we're going right here. And so pothole erosion. So we've gotten into this some, and we're gonna get back into it because it's super interesting stuff.
Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.
And the studies are coming from a whole bunch of different directions, but they're all kind of leading. When you follow these different directions in these different studies, they all kind of to me converge on the same conclusions: is that catastrophic floods, and the evidence would suggest to me that is pretty much honing in on the terminal ice age.
I love that line at the bottom of that paragraph said, have a very low frequency of occurrence.
Yes. The transportation of coarse debris, the major work and erosion of the valley floor and sides are accomplished during major floods that have a very low frequency of occurrence. Yes. Well, look here. Yeah, the sequence of events that have occurred in the Little River Valley since 1949 suggests a mechanism by which many familiar features of the bottomlands and mountainous regions of the Appalachians are formed.
Yeah,
So,
buddy, I saw that.
What he's saying
I saw
right
that,
there
that
is
runway.
big floods with a
Congrats,
very
man.
low
It's pretty good
frequency
time,
of
too,
occurrence.
man. Improve your
That's
cast on
essentially what
this.
he's saying.
Oh yeah.
Geomorphology and forest ecology of the mountain region in central Appalachians.
I just love the understatement of that sentence.
Oh, I know.
Well, I
That
don't
little
want
river valley, sorry, that's like the 400
I
foot
think I'm
gorge
gonna
we went
take
to
a break now
on
and
the
use the
lower
washroom.
Cumberland trip, right?
Yeah.
Be back here.
Little river down there in Alabama. Yeah, so let's see, how did we
I'm gonna
get
be like
here?
a few minutes.
You started
Well, we-
imbrication. Were you
minutes or
getting
something.
back to the slump blocks?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll look at the Torreva slump block and then we'll go on, because we talked about it. I thought it'd be interesting to actually pull up the slides, or a slide, to show people what that is. And it's, you know, we'll come back to that because it's so interesting and so important. But how we have documented the effect of gigantic floods in the southwestern deserts. So I'm going to pull that up right now. And
We started late here, so we're trying to kind of close her down. Is that where you were going, Russ?
Yeah, I was basically saying, you know, we're running out of time, so if you were gonna show those pictures and then maybe wrap up the ice age stuff we were talking about.
Yeah, we'll do that. So let's see, that's slide 100, and let's get out of there and go back to slide 100. And this is what the Torreva block is that we were talking about, that you can see in the southwestern deserts. That is evidence of oversaturation of the ground. Here we go. Okay, share screen. And there we go. Okay, are you seeing this?
Yep.
All right, cool. All right, well, you can see here's the original rock strata. Now, this is probably mostly sandstones in here, probably with some limestones, but lithology isn't that critically important. But the thing to see is that you've got the horizontal strata here, and this is the same rock in the same layers, but you can see it's dislodged, come loose, and it's essentially, you know, like you said, it's turned down. In other words, the rock is dipping or tilting, the rock surface is tilting downwards toward the cliff face. And what you can see then in front of it is, if you look at the hummocky terrain, and you can see some of the same hummocky terrain infilling the crevice between the slump block here and the original cliff face. All of that is of the sweet, and basically what it is the result of this ground becoming super saturated. And then it becomes so saturated that the rock itself loses all cohesiveness, and big sections of the face of it then slump down in this fashion that I'll show you with my hands when we close the slide here. And then all of this material here is the lesser stuff, that the debris stuff that was spread out and piled up in front. So all of this is of a suite. So that's all essentially evidence.
So basically a block kind of breaks off the cliff and then tilts backwards.
Yes.
Where it broke off from as it's sliding down, right? That's the idea.
That's the idea, yeah. So it's like, you know, here's your layers, here it is, and then it slumps off, and as it's going down, it does this. It slumps down like this.
Right.
Yeah. So that's your Torreva block right there. So, let me get out of here for tonight. Go back to what we were talking about. We were looking at the tree growth as a result of increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide. And that, we're going back to the 1984, when this was really beginning to be recognized as something that was occurring in nature. And we discovered that there were two tree species studied for the researcher, bristle cone pines, and they grow near the tree line at altitudes typically around 10 or 11,000 feet above sea level. And earlier studies by Lamarche and others discovered the tree ring thickness, and hence tree growth rates began accelerating after 1840. Now this is right there coincidental with the exact timing that the Little Ice Age is ameliorating, right? Mid-19th century. So he's saying here, so it says, but later studies up to the 1980s showed continued accelerated growth rates in spite of the fact that the climate began to cool during this period. So we kind of got off on that tangent talking about that period between the 40s and the 70s and up to the 80s where the climate was cooling in the mid-century, and then it started warming again in the 80s. So what they noticed, though, was that the tree ring growth continued during this period of cooling, which led them to think, well, then it's not all attributable to the change in temperature. This is clearly a factor, but it's not fully explaining these nice big fat tree rings that they're finding in these bristlecone pines that are growing up at 10,000, 11,000 feet above sea level, right? So this is what they write in the abstract to the article. It came out in 1984. It was published in the journal Science. A response of plant growth to increased atmospheric carbon dioxide, which has been anticipated from laboratory data, may now have been detected in the annual rings of subalpine conifers growing in the western United States. Experimental evidence shows that carbon dioxide can be an important limiting factor in the growth of plants in this high altitude environment. In other words, lower the amount of carbon dioxide, and now you're going to restrict growth of these high altitude plants. Okay? He goes on to say, the greatly increased tree growth rates observed since the mid-19th century exceed those expected from climatic trends, but are consistent in magnitude with global trends in carbon dioxide, especially in recent decades. Now, the importance of this particular paper is this is like some of the first initial recognition that carbon dioxide increases in the atmosphere may be fueling plant growth and hence a greening. And what I'm going to do, let's see. Okay, let's do this. I will go to share screen again. Go to screen 2.
So they're saying, are you saying that they initially were thinking that
it was exclusively from that it was exclusively from the warmth, the increasing temperature from the end of the Little Ice Age?
But that when they looked at the actual
growth, like it said, it far exceeded what they were projecting just from the increase in temperature. So this led them to go, well, what else could be promoting growth? And it was the obvious answer. Carbon dioxide has increased. So here's some interesting graphs that they published. Ring width indices for limber pine, Mount Jefferson, Nevada, showing rapidly increasing growth since the 1960s. So
that's amazing, man.
It'd be interesting to see this, because this is 1984. But what you're seeing here, of course, is pre-industrial, and then you see as the industrial revolution and the consumption of fossil fuels is increasing, you get this here, and then from the 50s and 60s on, when the carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere really began to pick up, you see exactly corresponding with that the increase in tree ring width. And here's graphs from all these different places. So the assumption here is that there's two things driving this, because we're looking here at, again, we're going back here, and this is Little Ice Age back here, and pre-industrial amounts of carbon dioxide. Then we start getting into two things happened. Mid-19th century to the late 19th century, climate is warming out of the Little Ice Age, and then as we get into the 20th century, we start really putting more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and then it accelerates after World War II, and then really picks up in the 1960s. And every graph shows the same thing, this ascending curve here. And so yeah, these are the growth records for bristlecone pine sampled from the White Mountains, California. They are typical of all samples gathered and studied by this team. Growth rates at the Sheep Mountain site increased by 106% between 1850 and 1983. at the Campito mountain site, they increased by 73% during the same time interval. So 73, say 75 up to more than 100% increase in ring width. After careful consideration of all possible explanations, the authors state, we believe from the evidence now available that subalpine vegetation generally and upper tree line conifers in particular could now be exhibiting enhanced growth as a direct response to increasing concentrations of atmospheric carbon dioxide. They conclude by saying, although high altitude subalpine forests constitute only a small fraction of the Earth's standing biomass, increased CO2 uptake and storage could now be occurring in these habitats. And subsequent decades of research has shown absolutely that carbon dioxide fertilization is taking place. It is fueling a greening of the planet. It is causing greater plant growth and plants to be hardier, more resistant to drought, more resistant to infestation of insects, more resistant to plant diseases and pollution like ozone, more efficient water uptake, and at the same time, their thermal capturability is being exhausted. But their photosynthetic activity is still increasing and creating an improved, much more vigorous biosphere. So why is nobody talking about this? Why are they not? We've covered the whole, logarithmic, inverse logarithmic heating capacity of increased increments of carbon dioxide. You guys remember that, right? Yeah. So what we've basically shown is that as far as the bimodal function of carbon dioxide, one is a greenhouse gas, the other drives photosynthesis. We've shown that its role as greenhouse gas really is in that first 100 parts per million, 150 parts per million. Interestingly, at the same concentrations at which it's not fueling photosynthesis, right? Because remember, when you hit 150 parts per million, the pressure of carbon dioxide is too low. The plants don't take it up anymore. At 150 parts per million, the biosphere begins to die. Yet, what happens is that first 100 to 150 parts per million is where all of the greenhouse warming takes place. Once you get to 150 parts per million, the greenhouse function kind of gives way and the photosynthetic function takes over. And continues to increase biomass up until, commercial greenhouses run CO2 at 1,000 to 1,200 parts per million. And you have people working in those greenhouses every day, week after week, month after month, year after year, showing no deleterious effects. We know the same thing in submarines. The carbon dioxide is much higher in submarines. We could go down the list. My thought is, as we look further into the
winery.
Yeah, I bet it is.
In fermentation, it gets high.
I bet it does. That's an interesting, I hadn't even thought of that. But so, here's the point. There's this whole other discussion about carbon dioxide that is not happening anywhere within mainstream media. The only place you're going to find, anybody who discusses this kind of science is immediately put in the box climate change denier. And then that's all you need to do. We'll put the label on them, and then you don't need to look at the evidence anymore. Oh, they're climate change deniers. But hopefully this is a little bit of an antidote to that. So anyways, yeah, I mean, we've just barely scratched the surface of this kind of research, which is amazing. It's showing literally that, deserts are greening.
Yeah. Yeah, that is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, it's good news. And
good news.
It's gonna make it harder to find pyramids, though.
Yeah, we need deserts. They preserve things.
Well, guess you got a point. Well, yeah, I mean, look, it means we got to get our asses in gear over the next 10 years or so before everything is swallowed up by jungle again, right?
Yeah. Yes. All right. Thank you, Randall. Just again, remind everybody, randallcarlson.com. Sign up for the newsletter. Keep an eye on the website for updates.
This is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. And we're going to dive back into more of the climate change stuff. I do want to remind people real quick here up front, randallcarlson.com for everything you want to check for Randall Carlson. Sign up to the newsletter. We got trips and tours coming up, and there is always new stuff happening. So make sure you check the website for new things. But yeah, Randall, where are we going today?
Well, I thought we'd pick up our disclosure on the carbon cycle and the nature of the beast.
All right.
You guys ready for the beast?
I think so.
Yep. Bring it on.
Bring it on. Bring on the beast.
Bring on the beast.
Carboniferous.
Okay, so there's nothing we need to report on as far as bringing people up to date on what's been happening with us and why we've been so neglectful of churning out podcast episodes every week.
Yeah, stuff's happening. Things are busy, but we're trying to get back into the swing of it. So.
Check the live shows. We really want to use that for the current events kind of things and keep this rolling and give Randall maximum time to present his info. But yeah, we can talk about a few things. There's always tours going on, and there's a monthly newsletter, so that's what we try to direct people to every time. He gives commentary and summaries of latest scientific papers coming out, and any tours, any previous episodes that have been released, etc. randallcarlson.com/newsletter will get you there. Just sign up with an email and it'll come first Saturday of every month.
So, and since the release of our previous episode, we did a presentation lecture in Nashville, another one this past weekend, which was what, about the 4th? Was it the 4th of March?
March 4th, yes.
March 4th, yes. Let us march forth.
That's right.
To conquer. So March 4th, yeah, we did a presentation in Nashville. At the same place we recorded the Sacred Geometry Weekend introduction. And that, we recorded it, so it was not live streamed, but we recorded it, so at some point in the very near future, we'll have that lecture available to people. And I thought it went very well. It kind of segued over into the idea of education and the specific steps that we could be taking now and into the next few years to try to turn this tide of wokeness and everything else, the degradation that has taken over education in America, and get back to an authentic way of bringing people to knowledge. And I think this tour that we've got coming up is going to be interesting. The next Cumberland tour that we've been talking about with people, that by the time this episode comes out, we will probably have already done that tour, won't we, Brad? You think we will?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so this now will be in the past, but what I find really exciting about this trip is each trip, it's like the number of young people is growing. So we're going to have 6 kids, ages like 10 to 12 to 13 in there, who are going to be going on this trip with us. And I think it's going to be really great to have that young energy and being able to take them out and tell them the story of these incredible landscapes that we're going to be exploring in eastern Kentucky. So within a couple of weeks, by the time this comes out, I'm sure Laura will have posted pictures. We'll have probably some video clips from that trip. And yeah, it's going to be some amazing stuff. And Brad, you were just up there doing some recon on some of the trip routes, weren't you?
Yeah, definitely. Doing the trails and finding my way around some of the arches and waterfalls that we're going to be going to. Yeah, pretty spectacular landscape up there in the sandstone and the limestone of the Upper Cumberland there in Kentucky. Yeah, pretty spectacular. It's going to be a good one.
It's going to be a good one. But by the time you see this, I probably say, yeah, it was really a good one. Because when people are viewing this, it'll be in the past tense. So yeah, we've been talking about the carbon cycle. And this is something that seems to be conspicuously absent from the conversation about climate change these days. And yet you can't really talk about the role of carbon without dealing with its important and function, really probably more important even than its role as a greenhouse gas, which is its role as in photosynthesis. So what we started getting into was how important carbon dioxide is to the health and well-being of plants. And to get into that whole story of photosynthesis and the relationship between carbon dioxide and plants is extremely interesting. And so I think we should just kind of maybe dive into it. I don't have a really precise order for this information, but I don't think we really need that other than just getting into it, and we will kind of try to place it in a historical context as we go. Stop me if we did this last time. I want to pick it up. Maybe it won't hurt to have a little bit of overlap, but one of the early books that I studied or read to try to understand, get a deeper understanding of some of these cycles of nature is up.
The lag, man.
I probably was mid-'80s. It was a textbook from 1983 called The Economy of Nature, a textbook in basic ecology. So in this book from 1983, the author, Robert E. Ricklefs, speculates, and this is what he speculates. He first lays out the basic idea that organisms need energy to move, grow, and maintain the functions of their body. Energy to support these activities enters the ecosystem as light, which plants convert to chemical energy during photosynthesis. The rate at which plants assimilate the energy of sunlight is called primary productivity. It is important to realize that primary production underlies the entire trophic structure of the community. The energy made available by photosynthesis drives the machinery of the ecosystem. The flux of energy through populations of herbivores, carnivores, and detritus feeders, and the biological cycling of nutrients through the ecosystem are ultimately tied to the primary productivity of plants, which is then in turn, end of quote, which is then in turn tied to the uptake of carbon by the plants. Okay, so during photosynthesis, here's what's happening here. You have plants capture light energy and transform it into chemical energy in the form of organic compounds. These compounds may be stored conveniently in their energy later released to meet the demands of biological processes. Photosynthesis chemically unites two common inorganic compounds, carbon dioxide and water. And we know that the atomic structure of carbon dioxide, or carbon, of which carbon dioxide is simply two carbon atoms. Carbon, the structure of that is electrons, protons, neutrons, like all elements. Electrons.
Wait, what did you say about carbon dioxide? Is it CO2, carbon, two oxygen?
Yeah.
Well, carbon dioxide is, yes, two oxygen. It's one carbon and two oxygen.
Yeah, okay.
Did I say that? I may have.
No problem.
No problem.
Okay, no problem. But yeah, let's be clear on that. That's what carbon dioxide is. It's a single carbon, two oxygen. The carbon atom is composed of 6 electrons, 6 neutrons, and 6 protons in its non-ionized form, okay? So, well, again, photosynthesis chemically unites two common inorganic compounds, carbon dioxide and water, and together they form glucose, which is a simple sugar. So the overall equation is you have 6 carbon dioxide molecules, you add to that 6 molecules of water, and what then happens is that is catalyzed by light. 6 carbon dioxide molecules, 6 of water, put those together, catalyzed by light, and then what you get is C6H12O6, which is 1 molecule of glucose sugar. Plus, you get 6 molecules of oxygen. And this is a key point here. Those 6, you get that 6 extra molecules of oxygen left over. And that's why in the process of photosynthesis, that extra oxygen molecule is released to the atmosphere. So going on with this. Okay, you got a question?
6 extra atoms of oxygen, or is that what you're saying? Or 6 molecules?
6 molecules, which
6O2.
6O2.
Okay.
Yeah. So because photosynthesis requires gas exchange across the surface of a leaf, productivity also parallels the rate of transpiration of water from the leaf surface.
Okay, my friends.
While I'm doing this,
another...
maybe you would look up the definition of the word transpiration.
Not too long,
okay.
Maybe another...
And let's see what that says.
10,
I could define it,
minutes.
but let's be precise here. You've heard the term transpiration, right? This is the exchange of water.
10, 15 minutes. Thank you so much, Southern Yellow Jack, for the sub, dude. I really appreciate that, man. Hope you're enjoying your Chinese buffet.
I almost said the lunar surface.
Enjoy it.
So it's the process of evaporation of water from aerial parts.
It's okay. I wasn't gonna play all afternoon anyways. I just wanted to get a couple hours in.
As really the moisture content of soil
we're actually doing really well as we
have
pass
a
away.
Greater difficulty
we're actually doing really well.
Removing water from the soil.
I'm actually really happy with.
And so the leaves close their stomata
big time,
to reduce water loss. Now, do you understand that the stomata are these little apertures in the leaf that take up the carbon dioxide?
Right. And when they're open, they can also evaporate water.
Yes. So, in fact, look up the word stomata, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
So, as the moisture content, so think of this, as the soil dries out, then the plants are having a harder time removing water from the soil. So what they're going to do now is by the apertures that through which water is being lost close down to minimize the amount of water being lost to the atmosphere. You got
right. Stomata are tiny openings or pores in plant tissue that allow for gas exchange.
There we go. Okay, so when soil moisture is reduced to the wilting point, leaves are effectively shut off from the surrounding air and photosynthesis slows to a standstill. So the rate of photosynthesis is therefore closely tied to the plant's ability to tolerate water loss, which is in turn to the availability of moisture in the soil and to the influence of air temperature and solar radiation on the rate of evaporation. So humid environments favor high rates of photosynthesis by reducing transpiration from leaves. Okay, so we're going to keep this in mind as we look here at the effect of increased carbon dioxide on the functioning of plants. We'll come back to this idea of the stomata and the gaseous exchange between the leaf and the atmosphere. Okay, so we're going to come forward now to 1987. And this was in the science journal called Tellus, T-E-L-L-U-S. I believe it's out of Sweden. Anyway, they deal with a lot of earth science, environmental science, things like that. This was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, looks like a 7-person team, which included Roger Revelle. And Roger Revelle was the climate scientist invoked by Al Gore in his Inconvenient Truth, because Al Gore was a student of Roger Revelle. However, interestingly, Al Gore never actually went into what Roger Revelle thought or knew or believed about the matter of climate change and carbon dioxide, and as a medium for heat capture. And when you start getting into that, you discovered that no, there's no clear-cut affirmation or confirmation of what Al is saying in the in the show. So this is where it gets interesting here, because his name is on this study I'm going to quote from here. And the title, this is 1987, the title of the article is Modeling Stimulation of Plants and Ecosystem Response to Present Levels of Excess Atmospheric Carbon Dioxide. So it's a computer modeling, right? Modeling stimulation of plants and ecosystem response. So they're looking at what this increased. By 1987, they're now considering, the role of and effects of carbon dioxide. And so they're attempting this early computer modeling. Ecosystem response to present levels of excess atmospheric carbon dioxide. And this is what they say here. A large number of carbon dioxide stimulation experiments with selected plant communities in controlled or semi-controlled environments suggest that the annual production and biomass accumulation is increased at elevated CO2 concentration. I'll read that again because it's so important. The stimulation experiments that they did with selected plant types and communities in a variety of controlled or semi-controlled environments suggest that the annual production and biomass accumulation is increased at elevated carbon dioxide concentrations. If CO2 stimulation
all right, maybe 10 more minutes,
then
I gotta sign off.
Production is a
Thanks
real
everybody.
effect in natural ecosystems as well.
Appreciate it.
The dynamics of the presented model suggest that there may be an increase in standing biomass as well as in litter and humus carbon. Okay, they're speculating, and to just strip it of its technical terminology, they're saying that, well, maybe there's going to be an increase in the sheer mass of plants in the global environment. Right? There may be an increase in standing biomass. So that includes anything above the ground. But not only the standing biomass, but also the litter and humus carbon, which comprise the ground mass and the soil. Now, so they're speculating. They're doing this computer modeling, and what the computer model is telling them is that the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is very well going to stimulate an increase in the mass of plants, the increase in the standing biomass. Okay, so now we'll come forward by 10 years to an article by a soil scientist in the journal Science in 1997 entitled Carbon Dioxide and Vegetation. So what happens to vegetation when greenhouse gases, mainly carbon dioxide, increase in concentration and the temperature goes up? The Framework Convention on Climate Change commits the signatories to avoiding dangerous interference with the climate system, interference that might harm the world's agriculture and natural ecosystem.
What was that?
But just what are the likely responses of vegetation? Street Perrott and her colleagues have studied the paleo-environmental history of high-altitude lakes in East Africa. They examined the lake sediments, the pollen and leaf waxes in them, and the carbon isotope composition of bulk organic matter and of specific biomarkers. They conclude that the increasing concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere since the last glacial period has allowed trees to grow where the vegetation was, before 13,000 years ago, restricted to an almost treeless, grassy heathland. Interesting that they use that date from 13,000 years ago, at which point the carbon dioxide is estimated to have been about 180 parts per million in the global atmosphere. But now what they're showing here is that there's the trees are now growing where 13,000 years ago It was treeless. Okay? They're attributing this to the increase in carbon dioxide. Acknowledging that carbon dioxide concentration itself affects the growth of trees enables us to see that the cooling of tropical land was perhaps not so great. During the glacial times, the trees were being starved of the substrate for photosynthesis. Along these same lines, Sage has argued that agriculture became viable at several places around the world between 11,000 and 6,000 years ago, only when the carbon dioxide concentration became sufficiently large to sustain decent yields for our first farmers. For the individual plant, he then goes on and points out that for the individual plant, water use efficiency is almost directly proportional to the level of CO2 for a given regime of temperature and humidity. So, concentrations of 180 parts per million, such as occurred during the late glacial maximum, being half the current levels, would mean that plants had to transpire twice as much water then as now to achieve the same level of photosynthesis. Put another way, doubling the carbon dioxide concentration is almost like doubling the rainfall as far as plant water availability is concerned. Wow. Further, increased greenhouse forcing also speeds up the hydrological cycle, and so on average, the actual rainfall increases with increasing CO2 concentration. Both photosynthesis and the enhanced greenhouse effect are more sensitive to carbon dioxide levels when the concentrations are low. The translation of increased photosynthesis to increased growth rate is not straightforward, depending also on developmental processes. However, the effect of the 180 part per million increase from the late glacial maximum to the present 360 part per million. Now this is in 1997 and it's now at about 406, right? He's returning us now to an idea that we talked about in an earlier episode when we talked about the logarithmic effect of the greenhouse, the logarithmic scaling of the greenhouse effect on terms of increased warmth in the atmosphere.
What's up to Russell? Dude, he is,
you mean
man.
like as the concentration of carbon or CO2 increases, the
what's up, Toad? How you doing, man?
amount of
I'm about to sign off though, my dude. Sorry, man.
Logarithmically.
Sorry, guys. Sorry to be low energy today.
And so he's making reference to that.
I'm happy everyone's here.
The effects of the 180 parts per million increase from the late glacial maximum to the present 360 parts per million.
No, I'm not doing box ending.
Could be much greater
on my health
than the effects of going from 360 to 540 parts per million. The latter, 540, being twice the pre-industrial level. So what was that? The pre-industrial level was, I think he's taking it as 280, probably. Let's see, what did I say, 540? So he's taking that as 270 parts per million as being the pre-industrial level of carbon dioxide. So again, and this is so important in this whole discussion about the role of carbon dioxide in affecting climate change. I'm going to read it again. The effects of the 180 part per million increase from the late glacial maximum to the present 360 parts per million should be much greater than the effect of going from 360 to 540 parts per million. The latter being twice the pre-industrial level. So in other words, pre-industrial, 270 parts per million. You double that. But the effect of that doubling are going to be a lot less. He doesn't go into how much less, but we learn that the decreasing thermal capture ability of carbon dioxide diminishes in a logarithmic scale. So each increment is an order of magnitude less than the previous.
Is he also talking about the effects that it has on plants? Or is that not, he's talking about the climatic effect?
He's talking about the climatic effect.
Okay.
Because actually, he says both photosynthesis and the enhanced greenhouse effect are more sensitive to CO2 levels when the concentrations are low.
Okay.
So in other words, take down the concentration of CO2, that is going to be, so there, it's an enhanced effect because the increase from 180 to 280 parts per million is going to be a lot more than the same increase of, say, 280 to whatever, or from 400 to 500 and whatever. Because as you increase the amount of carbon dioxide, the amount of heat trapped by it is diminishing logarithmically. And of course, as we've talked about, the way this has gotten around in the computer models of the IPCC is to introduce these positive feedback effects, primarily in the role of water vapor, which is something we should come back and definitely talk about, and we will be talking.
So at low levels of CO2, any increase or decrease has a much greater effect on the warming and cooling than it does when CO2 levels are high.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly right.
Plants are also much more sensitive to changes down at low levels than they are to high levels. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, got it. That's perfect. Great. I'm glad we clarified.
Pretty good start.
I have a little question. It's sort of like a side.
Sure.
But I was curious about when you're talking about the grasslands versus later when there's trees growing there in East Africa. Are trees, do you think they're scrubbing more CO2 in general than grasslands?
Good question, and I think the answer is yes. I think they are, because you see, with the trees, you got to think of it that the carbon dioxide is literally combining with water to create substance.
Yeah, it's building the tree.
But grass has produced a lot of material.
Yeah. This is true. This is a really good question. And I probably encountered that somewhere in the studies, but I don't remember off the top of my head. In terms of if you're partitioning the biomass, say, into trees and grasslands.
From grasses, yeah.
I don't know the answer.
Because I'm curious about the response of the plant life to the different levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. Is this
all right? Maybe two more minutes or so, and then I gotta sign off.
Like if there's a whole bunch of CO2, then naturally the trees are able to grow, but are they mitigating that increase? You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because maybe they're capturing more.
We're improving.
Yes.
I'm just
because
curious.
The more plant talk about feedback loops. As
it's really
the
insane,
biomass increases, it's just like, think of you're a little kid and you eat, and you're going to eat at what portion that you're going to eat if you're a 3-year-old. How much are you going to eat at a meal compared to when you're fully grown? Well, you eat, and that food that you intake literally gets turned into the substance of your body, and whatever it is, the genetic processes in there to convert that into the substance of your body. As you grow and get bigger, you're going to consume greater amounts of food.
Right.
Okay, one more
in the same way
good
with
run.
the tree.
So the trees has
stream later. Yeah, I probably will later. Probably will.
Quite a bit, I imagine.
Yeah, but it's probably going to be consuming its maximum.
Thanks, man. Yeah.
While it's
just keep
growing,
plugging away. I think so.
Because it's converting it into substance, and then once it's reached maturity, it'll probably then level off.
I think so too, man.
Wouldn't that make sense? Because
I
now
just started
it's not
a couple days
using
ago with this.
the carbon dioxide for growth anymore. It's not converting it. Well, it is, because it's still like if it's a deciduous tree, it's going to lose its leaves, and then it's got to create new leaf.
That's a lot of material again. I mean,
that's a lot of material again, right?
And also the other thing that the biomass does is decrease the albedo as well, right?
Yeah, well, it would. Yeah, it certainly
Calling
it. Yeah, so it's consuming light in a sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go on here. Plants of today are much less water and carbon dioxide limited than they were at the late glacial maximum. Nevertheless, one suspects that the direction of change in the near future will be the same as that following the late glacial maximum. That is, one of increased.
See, my timing's just getting better.
Rainfall.
Oh my god, this is the run.
Not
oh, I shot him in the
so much
thigh. No.
Rainfall, but remember the idea
No.
that.
No.
As he said in the previous one, that doubling the CO2 concentration.
That was a pretty good ender, I guess. I have to go.
I
gotta go. I want to play more, but that was a pretty good ender. I shot him in the thigh, I think. Almost. Yeah, but you see, you know the best part of that run was? That was the 3 bullets entering the dark room. That was the best part.
Maximum, that is one of
that because I timed the guards finally.
With the
I was playing for 2 hours. I haven't timed him once perfectly. That was like a perfect timing. Because I waited just like a couple more frames.
Given that the availability of water.
Damn it. Alright. I think I could even go forward a little more because I'm pretty slow to the glass.
This aspect, at least.
No, you are not, Toad.
Change
Toad.
is a welcome one.
Are you serious, man?
Well, yes, it is. You know, what the implication here is that growing things.
Yo, are you serious right now, man? Are you serious? Are you? I gotta play now more for Toad. I'm gonna be late for
now. Let's jump back to 1992.
Are you serious, Toad? Look at the list and Toad.
Also into Journal Science.
Are you serious, bro? Wow, man.
By
holy
three
shit.
Authors.
What a fucking legend.
Obviously European.
I gotta get some. I gotta get the PV on some level.
Let's see. We probably got
to commemorate this fucking moment.
What actually?
What level is going to be?
Credentials are.
Can
they're
I
publishing in
an
the
Aztec
peer-reviewed
PV?
journal Science.
Holy shit, dude.
Article 1992.
Yo, Toad, you're the fucking
Biomass and Carbon Budget of
Everyone go follow Toad.
Forests.
Irie Perfect Ace.
1971
Everybody.
to 1990.
Gwyn.
So this is looking
Anomaly.
at the
Ambi Wambi,
biomass
Dirty
and
Harry,
carbon budget of
Monksy,
European forests over a period of 19 almost 20 years.
Star Kid
The results of this study were published in 1992.
Mike. Amazing.
And here's what they said. The fact about forest resource seemingly contradict the widely held view that European forests are declining.
Should we get a damn SAPB to commemorate this moment?
So up to this point, and I can actually remember.
Thanks, guys.
Reading
Yo, Toad, you're a
articles
fucking
and
legend.
studies in
20
the 70s,
subs?
even into
Are
the
you
80s,
serious right now?
Talking about the
controversial
decline of forests. I
Japanese
have a book on
damn
my shelf
essay,
back there that's
whatever.
the guy is railing on with a doomsday scenario about that within 20 years the forests of the world are going to be
Yo, Toad, thank you
almost
so much,
eliminated.
man.
And so there was this widely held view
that really helps a lot,
that
man. What?
globally forests were declining, and especially so in European forests. However, and now that we are doing
Twitch
actual studies, what it showed is that the fact about forest resources contradict the widely held view that European forests are declining.
Toad just gifted
Picking up
20
on
gift
quote, we
subs.
first elaborate on reasons for the increase of forest resources, and then describe pitfalls in the interpretation of forest health surveys, which have contributed to pessimistic views about European forests. And we don't necessarily need to go into all of that, but they point out that there were pitfalls in the thinking that led to the projections that forests were going to be withering away by the end of the 20th century. Clausen reports that growing stock and timber growth of potential in the United States have been, quotes, and this is quoting this guy Clausen, and anybody who wants to, dive into this for themselves. Again, I'm providing the
I don't think this is going to be
reference here.
PV.
Journal Science.
My PV is 129.
April 3rd, 1992, volume 256. So Clausen reports that growing stock and timber growth potential in the United States have been, quote, repeatedly and seriously underestimated.
Yo, Toad, man. Yo, everyone download the app. He has the most comprehensive ASMR app. You can play multiple sounds at the same time. I guess it is a PV.
Favorable climatic conditions, because let's remember, between 1892 and 1992, the climate has warmed. Over the last 150 years, the climate has warmed out of the Little Ice Age. And that warming has made a positive contribution.
Oh my god, this stupid level. I hate this
growth.
stupid fucking level.
Okay. An increase of forest resources can be explained by factors such as silvicultural development, favorable climatic conditions, the fertilization effect, and they're admitting it here now in 1992, but they're not quantifying. They're merely admitting it, but not quantifying that the fertilization effect of additional carbon dioxide in the air and the deposition of plant nutrients.
Ideal for this level.
They've pointed out that there's a series of things. Silvicultural development, which is basically the science of growing trees, right? Of growing and managing forests. That's essentially what silviculture is. So you got that. You've got favorable climatic conditions, which easily refers to the increase in warmth over the last century and a half. And then they say the deposition of plant nutrients, which is all a consequence of the preceding. But the key here, takeaway, is that it's also included in that is the fertilization effect of additional carbon dioxide.
He's gifted 20 before in the past too.
So then we also talked last episode about the mismatch of sources and sinks. That there is more carbon dioxide being taken up than the models suggest should be taken up. This is from also a 1992 article here. Actually, it's the same
I hit the stairs.
Of the biomass and carbon.
That's pretty good run, except for the stuck.
They're pointing out this mismatch of sources and sinks. You know, a source is somewhere the carbon dioxide is coming from, and a sink is where it's ending up. You know, is that sink going to be in biomass? Is it going to be in
thank
the
you
oceans?
so much, man. Thank you so much. So yeah, dude.
The ultimate sink, as we found out in the previous episode, was the carbonate rocks. And we found out that there's a huge amount of carbon
and the people that receive the subs, I really cranked up the ads. What's up, Baron?
Global carbon
budgets so I really cranked up the ads, so I really appreciate the gift subs too, because then people can just watch the stream without the ads now. And then I still get money from
the atmosphere. Budget calculations have remained incomplete since the estimated annual sinks appeared about 1.2 billion
missing the ads,
tons of carbon too low.
So being a sub
budget calculations have remained incomplete since the estimated annual sinks appeared about 1.2 billion tons of carbon too low. Our data indicate that European forests accumulated 85, and here you go, Kyle. In the European forests, accumulated 85 to 120 million tons of carbon per year.
Thank you, Toad.
In the 1970s and 80s. This alone represents 8 to 10% of the missing flux in the global carbon budget. If global or universal mechanisms play a role in Europe, similar biomass accumulation should have occurred in other
224. Oh my god, we're doing one more run for Toad.
And then they conclude, they're saying that despite air pollutants, which were still more of a problem in the early 90s, but certainly in the 70s and the 90s, that there were actual air pollutants.
Because they paid over 50 American dollars, and then that's like 75 Canadian dollars. I got it the other day.
In spite of the air pollutants, forest resources have
been averaging about $20 of ads based on.
In summary, we estimate that growing stock and forest growth in Europe increased between 1971 and 1990.
And it was the only real source of income I've had, other than the government trying to bribe us with some climate change money bullshit.
This information seemingly contradicts the commonly held view of forest decline in Europe.
That's a lot.
That's a very,
Yeah.
It is.
I think it's declining, and for it to increase 25 to 30%, that's a huge.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, this has been going on all over the world for the last 30 or 40 years. It was not even realized. Well, there was a lot of, one of the things that changed was we started getting satellite surveys of the actual amount of land covered by forest.
So what is that? just real quickly, what does that look like? Is the forest
increasing
in size and geographically, or is it just growing more trees within?
Both.
Both.
Both the above.
Okay. So the forests are slowly creeping closer to people's houses, and no one notices.
That's what
they all think that they're dying out.
This is the run.
I mean, you know, it's strange. I'm just trying to imagine what's happening.
Why? What the fuck?
So the year before, Sherwood B. Idso, who is a scientist that has probably devoted more years to the study
what the fuck
of the role of carbon dioxide.
This is not the run.
His son maintains a really great website, following in his father's footsteps. This was a 1991. So what, 32 years
That's
ago?
So dumb. Whatever, I think we got the 126. We're gonna sign off the 126.
By Sherwood B. Idso. It was published in the Bulletin of the American
Holy Jesus, a hard
Society in July of 1991.
All right.
The title of the paper is "The Aerial Fertilization Effect of Carbon Dioxide
put auto aim on, and then we're gonna sign
and
off.
its implications for global carbon cycling."
Thanks so much, man.
And maximum greenhouse warming.
Yo, Scotty. What's up, man?
And this is what he has to say. The question of ultimate surface temperature increase thus comes down to one of estimating the maximum amount of CO2 that man is likely to release.
Okay, I gotta go. I gotta go.
In the years ahead. A doubling of current emissions, for example, would lead to an atmospheric CO2 content on the order of 700 parts per million, which would probably be climatically acceptable, but only if Earth's forests are not decimated in the meantime. On the other hand, if the forested area of the globe could be increased, even greater quantities of carbon dioxide could safely be released to the atmosphere. In this regard, nature becomes our ally, as increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide result in growth rate increases of trees 5 times greater than growth rate increases in non-woody plants. So there we go, Kyle. Did you get that?
I got it,
man.
Really? Yeah, and I remember you showed the study of the guy, you know, that he had the trees in the pots. And, you know, he had one control and the other ones with different higher concentrations. They just grew way faster.
All right, I'm gonna go.
Yeah.
But grasses, they don't grow faster. You get the same amount of hay.
Well, the growth rate increases of trees 5 times greater than the growth rate increases in non-woody plants.
Yeah.
As a result, the carbon dioxide content of the air continues to rise. Hence, as the CO2 content of the air continues to rise in the years ahead, woody species will begin to expand their ranges, as is already happening in many parts of the world.
Now, so isn't this is just land-based though, right? There's ocean algae that is massive in this exchange as well, right?
So the result of these studies, now, you know, disclosure here, these studies for me were 10 years ago, but I think that the conclusions and the data is all still valid. It's probably been tweaked somewhat, but yes, this missing sink where half of the released carbon dioxide into the atmosphere was not accounted for 30 years ago is being taken up through a combination of ocean and land biome.
Okay, yeah.
Now the exact partitioning percentages, I don't know. They probably refined those numbers since I was doing this research, but probably not hugely. But the point is that both the ocean and the plants are taking up the additional carbon dioxide. And see, this is the thing about how this carbon dioxide pump works, is because you increase the algae, you increase the planktonic and benthonic feeders of the increased biomass in terms of algae and so on. And then all of these, you know, single-celled and small microscopic creatures are converting that carbon dioxide into their shells. And then when they die, their shells go to the bottom, and ultimately, unless something, stirs them up and sends them back up, and so their shells are, like an impact may do it, probably would